Netanyahu's government is hanging by a thread. He's got pressure in the streets. He's got pressure from Washington. He's got pressure from the business world. There are high-tech companies that are threatening to pull their people and their companies out of Israel, stop investing in Israel's high-tech economy. And then, of course, you've got people within Netanyahu's own party, like Gallant, but others. The former Speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, also agreeing with Gallant, not with Netanyahu. So this is complicated. And then of course, you've got the religious Zionism party, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, threatening to just bolt the government and bring it down. Israel is in the most severe political, social, domestic crisis that I have ever seen. And I interview people for the Rosenberg Report and All Israel News, experts from all across the country. They've never seen anything like it in 75 years. Hi, I'm Joel Rosenberg in Jerusalem with breaking news from the Rosenberg Report. This is a YouTube exclusive because we can't wait for Thursday. Events are moving too quickly. Let me recap what's been happening over the last 24 to 48 hours and then bring you right up to speed to where we are and the implications. But basically, the topic is judicial reform. Now, to many of you, evangelical Christians and others in the United States, Canada, and around the world, judicial reform in Israel, you may think, I don't really have any particular interest in a legislative debate inside Israel. I get that. But this has become much more than just a legislative debate. This has become a social and political crisis that could bring down the Netanyahu government on the one hand, and on the other hand, even Israel's president, Isaac Herzog, highly respected, calm, cool, collected, the least hyperbolic person I've ever met in Israeli politics. He said just about a week ago that this could bring us to civil war. So let me explain what's happening and why it's so important. Clearly, the country is deeply divided over how to proceed with judicial reforms. Now, there are some people in the country who don't want judicial reform at all, okay? That tends to be from the far left or even the center left. But most Israelis, I would say 70 to 80% of Israelis who are center or center right, they do believe that the Israeli legal system is broken and changes need to be made. The question is which changes and at what speed, and will there be enough national consensus built so it doesn't feel like one side is jamming major changes down the throats of everybody else, okay? That's one of the major elements. The other major element that's causing so much division, and I'll explain it in a moment, about how deep these divisions are. The other element is a religious secular divide, or a super highly religious, ultra-orthodox approach or ultra-nationalistic Jewish religious approach to reform and sort of mainstream Jewish perspective. And there is a feeling among many Israelis, not all by any means, but among many Israelis, that the ultra-religious or the highly aggressive religious nationalist parties in Israel that are part of Prime Minister Netanyahu's coalition are trying to jam down the throats of everybody else reforms that nobody else wants. So, and the goal that people fear is not that just that the legal reforms will make it impossible to ever stop those type of reforms, but that the goal of the reforms is to force Jewish halakha law, meaning law that comes out of the Old Testament Torah, as well as the rabbis, will force certain religious strictures and sort of commandments on the rest of the country that the country hasn't signed up for. Okay, we saw that last week when All Israel News broke the story of two ultra-Orthodox members of the Knesset writing a bill and submitting it to the legislature, the Knesset here, in which they would have outlawed any ability for people who believe in Yeshua, Jesus, to talk about our faith, share our faith, have a conversation about our faith, even answer questions that someone else of a different faith has generated, whether they're Jewish or Muslim or atheist or agnostic or whomever. If we had those type of conversations under this bill, if it passed, it would have been outlawed and we would have gone to prison, okay? So that is just an example that got the Christian community and the Messianic Jewish believers of Yeshua here in Israel and around the world horrified that the ultra-orthodox might impose that view on everybody else in Israel. And so that's just one example, but there are numerous examples of bills that have been introduced here in Israel in which people fear that's just going to get jammed on our throats. Now, what has happened? Many people in the country, including the Israeli president, Herzog, as I mentioned, have said to the prime minister, Mr. Netanyahu, hey, it's not that we're opposed to any type of reform. We want reform, but it's going too fast. Some of the elements are too controversial. Could we slow it down a little bit so we can have a national conversation about it and come to a compromise, come to a resolution that most people, not everybody, but most people can agree upon? Netanyahu has so far resisted slowing things down. So what happened? Protests have surged into the streets, and they've been going for 10 weeks, 11 weeks, 12 weeks, 13 weeks, continuing on, and they've been getting bigger and bigger and bigger. At the first, they were tens of thousands. Now, over the weekend, there were more than an estimated 600,000 Israelis out on the streets protesting. Now, some are protesting Bibi at all. They never wanted him, and they want him removed from power. So that is a core element of the protest, and we need to be honest about that, okay? But the other element are people who are like, no, I have no problem with Bibi, but I have a problem with this legislation at this speed and these particular provisions. And so that's why this protest movement has swelled. But there's more. The defense minister of Israel, Yoav Gallant, over the weekend made a public statement on television saying, listen, while he supports the reforms in principle, there is so much tension, so much division within the military, within the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, that it's causing a crisis within the military because people are so divided and they fear that if a certain type of set of reforms get passed in their currently the way they're written, that the Supreme Court will have no power to strike down things that are against basic civil rights, human rights, okay? Now, whether that's true or not, that is how people feel. And as we talked about a moment ago, and all last week on All Israel News, there are certain bills that would definitely take away our human rights, our civil rights, our religious freedom. So I would say it is true that there is a concern, that's a real concern, that if the reforms are passed in currently the way they're structured, currently the way they're written, this could severely damage Israeli democracy. And that is the widespread view here. Now, Gallant, the defense minister, came out and said, let's slow it down a little bit. He asked the prime minister, of whom he's the same party, right? Gallant is part of the Likud party. He's a senior member. He's a close ally of Netanyahu. He's not part of the opposition. He's not hostile to Netanyahu or what Netanyahu and his team wants to accomplish. He's part of it. But he's saying, as a lifelong military leader and now the defense minister, he said, we need to slow this down, we need to have a conversation, and we need to come to some compromises, and I think we can do that. That was his statement. And his point was, let's stop the legislative process just till we get through the Passover holidays, okay? Well, in practical terms, that only means stopping for this particular week. Why? Because then we go into the Passover holidays and the Knesset is off. It's out of session for about 3 more weeks. So altogether, that would give about a month for things to maybe cool down a little bit, have some back channel conversations, see if there could be some compromise that would have a broader national consensus. Netanyahu, however, decided to fire the defense minister Gallant. Okay, so he was fired on Sunday. This has created a firestorm in Israel because the fear has become that Bibi Netanyahu now is going to jam this legislation through, and that the ultra-Orthodox and the highly aggressive Orthodox parties within the Netanyahu coalition, who are far more, they're actually quite different from Netanyahu in terms of their view of civil rights and human rights. They want to push this Jewish version of halakha, that's Jewish law, okay? They want to push that on the whole country, even though they're a fairly small percentage of the whole political base, much less the whole demographics of the country. But by firing Gallant essentially for insubordination, Netanyahu seemed to signal that he wasn't going to listen to any voices who said, let's slow this down a bit. Let's have this conversation. Let's come to a compromise. This brought more people into the streets, but more. Literally in the hours before I'm recording this on Monday afternoon here, Israel time, what's happened? The airport has shut down. The Ben-Gvir International Airport isn't taking flights in or out. Why? Because the labor unions who control all the people who work at the airport have said, absolutely not. We have to take a stand. We have to send a message that the direction that Netanyahu and his team are going is dangerous to Israeli democracy. So they have literally shut the main Israeli airport down. We do have another in the south, but this is our main airport. This is huge. People trying to leave for business, to see family, to see sick relatives, whatever, cannot get out. And people who are coming to Israel for tourism, for business, cannot get in, okay, as we speak. Now, there's more. Every school, every public school in the country has been shut down. And that's just today, Monday. We'll have to see how that plays out. McDonald's tweeted out they are shutting down all their stores, all their restaurants, in solidarity with this protest movement. The banks are shutting down. We are seeing a ripple effect that is not just social. It has, and it's not just political, it has deep economic implications for Israel. The ports in Israel that bring in, imported cars and imported goods and ship out all kinds of Israeli products. We are a export-based economy. That is why Israel's economy has been growing so fast, much faster than the United States, much faster than Europe, much faster than most of the world. But in an export economy, if the ports are not opened, meaning the shipping ports, if the airport is closed, not just for civilian traffic, but for cargo traffic. This is a huge economic problem. But it gets worse. Now we're talking about more and more opposition members and even people with legislators within the Netanyahu Likud party are saying we are not with this. We are looking for ways to cause Netanyahu to stop. Now, as I record this, Netanyahu has signaled that he might be ready, in fact, to halt the legislation for a while, okay? So this is interesting. He was supposed to give a talk to the nation at 10:30 this morning, Monday morning, Israel time. That would have been 3:30 in the morning on the east coast of the United States and 12:30 in the morning out on the Pacific West Coast. Netanyahu said he was going to make a major address to the nation to explain things, and all the leaks indicated that he was set to put a halt on the legislation for the time being, but that didn't happen. It didn't happen, at least as we record this. Why? Well, because Netanyahu has needed to gather all of the members of his governing coalition and have a conversation with them and explain to them that the White House is pressing on them. The banks are closing, the schools are closing, the ports are closing, the airports are closing. We've got to listen and we've got to respond. We're a democratic society. We have the right to push this through, but is that the responsible way? However, one of the major factions within Netanyahu's coalition is the religious Zionism party. These are the two most controversial political figures in Israel today on the far right. This is Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. These two and their party are now threatening Netanyahu. If you stop this legislative train, we are willing to bolt the government and bring the government down. Okay, so now Netanyahu, facing the need to battle Iran and keep Iran from becoming a nuclear weaponized country, has just had to fire, or I don't know if he had to, but he did fire his defense minister, who was leading all the coordinating of the internal plans to go to war with Iran if we have to. Hope we don't have to, but if we did. Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, also was in coordination with the Pentagon, with the White House, with European governments and militaries getting ready. If we have to go, we want to do this in coordination and not, cause surprise to any of Israel's allies. But Gallant is gone. What's interesting is Gallant's gone. Why? Because he called for a pause in the legislation for conversation. Bibi fired him, but now seems to be indicating that he does want this type of pause. But Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, the religious Zionism party, is threatening, if you do that, if you slow down or stop this process, we might bolt the government. Now, Bibi could call their bluff. Where are they going to go, right? If we go back to elections, maybe they get some more seats, but it's hard to imagine at this moment that extreme party would ever find a home in any government coalition, but who knows? Things are really topsy-turvy, and I can't wait till Thursday to brief you on all this because events are moving very rapidly. Now, we are awaiting word from Prime Minister Netanyahu. His speech will be critical. He did give a speech late last week to the nation in which he said, look, we do need to compromise. We do need to come together. I'm willing to do that, and I'm willing to move on some of the elements of judicial reform. I am listening, and I'm willing to make some changes. He didn't give specifics. He did, however, reject the specific reform compromise plan that President Herzog laid out. But one of Netanyahu's key allies in his life, in his friendships, in his political sphere, was Natan Sharansky. Sharansky, of course, the famous Jewish hero who was a Soviet citizen, had been arrested for being a outspoken Jewish person for human rights, was arrested by the KGB, sent to the Gulag for 9 years. And the world, including President Reagan and all kinds of world leaders, and the Jewish community around the world fought for the Soviets to release Sharansky. Sharansky eventually was released, came here, reunited with his wife, who was the one working behind the scenes to get the world to pressure the Soviets to let her husband out. And he eventually became a very senior official here and started his own political party, became the deputy prime minister, interior minister, diaspora minister. I became friends with him, and in fact, briefly, for a few months, a long time ago, even worked for Sharansky. Sharansky put out a statement late last week. I don't agree with every detail in Israeli President Herzog's reform compromise plan. However, I believe that I support the general direction. And Sharansky called on Netanyahu, slow this thing down, have a conversation, make some compromises so that there's buy-in from almost every sector of the Israeli society. So that's where we are at the moment. Netanyahu's government is hanging by a thread. He's got pressure in the streets. He's got pressure from Washington. He's got pressure from the business world. There are high-tech companies that are threatening to pull their people and their companies out of Israel, stop investing in Israel's high-tech economy. And then, of course, you've got people within Netanyahu's own party, like Gallant, but others. The former Speaker of the Knesset, Yuli Edelstein, also agreeing with Gallant, not with Netanyahu. So this is complicated. And then of course, you've got the religious Zionism party, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, threatening to just bolt the government and bring it down. This is the status that we are in right now. And I want to encourage you, all of you who are followers of Jesus Christ, who believe in the power of prayer, I'm asking you to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, this city where I'm coming to you from right now. Look, normally, when we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, according to King David's commandment in Psalm 122, what are we doing? We're mostly asking for God to protect Israel from external enemies, the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, Hamas, other radical Islamist and apocalyptic Islamist terrorist factions. But right now, I'm asking you to pray for the peace of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv and every city in Israel where we are having these massive protests. The malls are shut down. The stores are shut down. It is across the board as people are scared that something is going to be jammed down their throat and it's not going to be right, it's not going to be fair, and it will lead to the end of Israeli democracy. I'm not ready to go that far and saying that's what will really happen, but that is the way people fear. And I wanted to bring you up to speed on it. And I'm asking you to pray. Pray for cooler heads to prevail. Pray that the temperature can be dialed down. Pray for Prime Minister Netanyahu to in fact announce a pause. And look, he's the most experienced political leader in the country. He's the longest serving prime minister in the history of Israel. And as we just saw, as Christians and Messianic Jews just saw last week, when there was a moment that really threatened the human rights, the civil rights, the religious freedoms of Israeli believers in Yeshua, in Jesus, he took an unprecedented step to stand there and say, no, I won't let even members of my own government threaten that. I shouldn't say it's unprecedented. He'd done these things to stop it before, but never in quite this political context. So I want to be cautiously optimistic that Netanyahu will do the same right thing this week as he did last week, but I don't know what the future holds. Neither do you. The other scripture that I'm praying right now comes from the whole message about the sons of Issachar from the Old Testament. Men who understood the times and knew what Israel should do. That's what we need right now. And amidst all the chaos and all the political and social drama on the streets, in the Knesset, on television, in the media, we really need the Lord to give clarity and wisdom to the leaders who guide our country here in Israel. So please pray, and we'll keep you updated hour by hour at allisrael.com. That's All Israel News. And of course, you can sign up for our free email newsletter at All Israel News so that you can get all the latest headlines every day emailed directly to your phone or laptop or desktop. And of course, please check out rosenbergreport.tv. Make sure that you are tracking with all of our programs and subscribe to this YouTube channel for these TBN exclusives, as well as the full episodes of our program on the Rosenberg Report every Thursday night at 9 and Saturday nights at 9:30 p.m. Eastern.